Hello, welcome everyone who is joining me. I am here live today, July 12th at 3 p.m. Eastern for 3 at 3 with Angela. So glad that you can join me. This is going to be recorded so you can watch later. As a reminder how this works, this is a 3 at 3. I go live every other week at 3 p.m. on a day that I choose in advance. And you can submit questions to ask during this time period. And these questions can have anything to do with publishing, writing, editing. If you have a question and you're not sure where to ask it, this is it. You can ask and I will answer live. So I'm going to try and keep this to 20 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. And this week's Q&A is actually all about editing and working with editors because we got 3 similarly themed questions. So I decided to group those together and answer them all this week. So the first question is, when I approach a line editor, I ask for a sample edit, usually up to 1,000 words. How do I approach a developmental editor to determine whether we are a fit? So the first thing I want to say is I think it's great that you can ask a line editor for a sample. Not all editors do samples, and you're right, it is a lot easier to get a line editing sample than it is to get a developmental editing sample. So up to 1,000 words is usually probably pretty close to in line with what an editor will be willing to sample. So when you're looking for a developmental editor, it's actually still much like looking for a line editor. And as a side note, often you can find somebody who is both a developmental editor and a line editor. And I need to define what the stages of editing are because different editors use different phrasing. So just very quickly, developmental edits is also called content edits. Sometimes it's called substantive edits or story edits. And that is the kind of big picture edits where we're looking at story, structure, pacing, characterization, relationship, tension, conflict, world building. I think I said characterization already. So that's all, that's what developmental content, substantive story edits look like. Line edits are basically the craft of writing, how you're putting together your story, your sentences, your phrasing, how you're using words, how you're telling the story. So line edits aren't about the story itself, but the writing itself. The third stage of edits is copy edits. Copy edits are the cleanup stage. This is where we're looking for grammar, spelling, inconsistencies, details, smaller details, and things of that nature. And then the last one is proofreading. Proofreading is the very last stage of edits and is the most detail oriented. Sometimes we say it's pedantic because you have to be very detail oriented and ask questions that sometimes may not seem like they're important, but it's all in the details. So in that case, proofreading is the very last stage. So just to recap, we have developmental content edits, line editing, copy editing, and proofreading. So in this case, I mentioned that developmental edits and line edits can be done by the same editor. So it could be that you're finding the same editor to do both and then finding somebody different to copy edit and then somebody to proofread. So when you're looking for a developmental editor, I have a few suggestions as to how about going to find one. This is not about how to hire one because that's a whole nother topic, but instead how to find one and things to think about. So the first thing is obviously ask for recommendations. Ask your author peers who they've used for developmental edits, who they know other people have used and had good experiences with. Now, this comes with the caveat that what's a good fit for somebody else may not be a good fit for you. So that leads me to the second point is when you're looking for a developmental editor, you need to know what you want in an editor, know what you want them to be doing, know what your expectations are. So for instance, you need to know how many rounds do you want? For instance, in my business, I do 2 rounds of edits with developmental. But some editors may do more or may do edits until you and the editor are both happy with the book. So it may be like endless rounds of edits. Do you want somebody who's going to do phone calls, who's going to get on the phone with you and brainstorm? Somebody who's going to talk through edits with you in depth? Do you want somebody who writes a really detailed editorial letter? Do you want somebody who's going to be digging into the manuscript on a more granular story level and just really nitpicking like each of your story things? Or do you want somebody who is going to do like bigger picture and help you craft the book that you want to write? One thing, just kind of as a sad side note, is that sometimes people get book coaching and developmental editing confused. And coaching really is more about helping you write the book, whereas developmental editing is helping you shape the book after it's already written. So they're very two different things. In addition to that, you might want to speak with a couple of editors. Maybe you want to have a quick phone call or video call if that's something that they do, so you can ask them questions about their process and get a feel for their personality. Sometimes people want people who are just going to couch everything really politely and super kindly and almost in like positive ways. Whereas other people just really want somebody who's going to get straight to the point, tell them exactly what they think needs to be fixed. And it's okay if it's a little blunt. So you might want to judge their personality. Another way to find somebody is to look at the body of work. So if you really like certain authors' books, especially those who are indie published, then you could look at their acknowledgments and even ask them who they use as an editor. On the flip side of that, you can, when you're looking at the editor, look at their body of work. Look at what they've edited. What have they done? What awards have they won? Actually look at samples of their work by opening the look inside and seeing, does it seem appealing? Does it seem like the story flows well? Don't look at craft, because remember, developmental editing and line editing and copy editing are different. And so in this case, you're just judging the story itself. You're going to want to have a budget, because you want to make sure that you're looking in the right place based on your budget. You don't want to go straight to the editors who have edited multiple New York Times bestselling authors or who've been doing this for 20 years, because you don't want to go straight to them if you're trying to keep your budget at a couple $100s, for instance, because an editor who has more skill and experience is naturally going to be a higher cost for developmental edits. And then when you're looking for a developmental editor, look for somebody who specializes. And by that, I mean, you don't want somebody who says, I can do all edits, meaning developmental, line, copy, and proofreading. I can do it all, and I do all genres. You don't really want to work with an editor who doesn't specialize. Somebody who specializes is going to have developed the techniques, and they have developed their style and their I've lost my words. They've developed their skills. Skills is the word I was looking for. So over time, if you're not specializing, you can't develop all the skills. If you think about it just in terms of like a doctor, there's general practitioners, and then there's doctors who specialize in like ears, nose, and throat, so that they just study like one part of the body. Or podiatry, for instance, you're just studying one part of the body. It's the same when you're working with an editor. You want somebody who says, okay, I do developmental and line edits, and that's where I specialize and where I've honed my skills. Or you want somebody who's done the same for copy editing, or for proofreading. I always say I'm a good developmental editor and line editor. I'm a fine copy editor and a terrible proofreader, because they're different skill sets. And I'm only okay at those other two because I'm not constantly developing my knowledge of the changing style suggestions and like hyphen rules or spelling. So I'm not going to be great at those things, because I'm not specializing and fine-tuning my my skills. In the same way, a developmental editor is looking at the market, and they're reading books, and they know what they can dig into deep point of view. They can dig into pacing and tell you specifically what's not working. So you want somebody who specializes in the type of edits, and then you also want somebody who specializes in the genre. So specializing in genre looks a little bit more like maybe a little more broad, but still narrow scope. So, for instance, I always say that I do romance, but I don't do faith based romance. And I do mystery, thriller, women's fiction. I don't do science fiction and fantasy unless it's in the romance category. I definitely don't do literary fiction or nonfiction. So I'm instead specializing in specific genre fictions. You might find somebody who specializes in nonfiction and then drill down and find somebody who specializes in memoirs. And what that gets you is somebody who's familiar with the specific target audience and market that you're writing for. And that's what you want during developmental edits, because you want somebody who can help you edit the book for the reader, for the reading experience, and help you build your career and your readership in that way. So, okay, that question I think has there's a lot more that I can say about it, but for this purpose, I'm going to stop there. But there's a lot more to think about. Obviously, the next step is if you're going to hire a developmental editor, what questions you're going to ask them and what you're going to expect, like having a contract and things like that. But that's a different question. Oh, I forgot to show that question before. So now for the second question, how would you suggest I find a production team, editors, proofreaders on a budget? So I think the first thing is to have a budget. So I'm glad that you're asking this question, because having a budget is very important. This is something that a lot of people don't go into hiring a team or editors with an idea of needing a budget or having a budget or knowing what their budget is. So it's great that you're already thinking about having a budget and setting that up. I'm going to answer this question actually in two parts. One is I'm going to assume you have a small to medium budget, and the second one is no budget. And then I'll just kind of answer briefly at the end if you have a really high budget. So if you're working on a limited or to like mid-range budget, then the first thing to do is that you need to rank in importance who's going to be on your team. For some of you, this may look different, but here are some things that you would want to have in mind. So you said specifically production team. So I'm not including cover artists in that. But you may want a developmental editor and a developmental editor / line editor, a copy editor, and a proofreader. So you could potentially have 3 different kinds of edits that are done on your production team. And then you may also want a formatter, somebody who does all of the formatting for you. So potentially there's anywhere from 1 to 4, possibly 5 if you're including the cover artist, or 5 if you're including some type of second editor or an additional editor, like if you're doing developmental, line, copy, and proofreading all separate. So anywhere from 1 to 5 people on your team. When you're trying to decide what's of most important, the first thing is to understand your own skill set. So when you're ranking who's important on your team, are you a pretty clean writer, but you struggle with pacing and character development and story development, in which case then the developmental editor becomes the most important person on your list. Or it may be that you are great with story, like you really feel like the story is tight, but you're not that great with grammar or cleaning things up, in which case then a copy editor is going to be the first or second person on your list. So if I'm going to kind of rank them myself, I would say developmental editor and somebody who does double duty as developmental editor, line editor, then copy editor, then formatter, and then proofreader. And I don't want any proofreaders to get mad at me. So I'm going to tell you why I'm saying this, because when you're indie publishing and you have a limited budget, you have to make choices. And when we look at the readers who are consuming the largest quantity of books that are being indie published, we know that those readers are reading first for story and characters, and the editing doesn't necessarily fall into even the top 3. And if it does, then it's the third. The reason we know this is because, one, just by anecdotally looking around and seeing what reviews say, comparing to what's inside the book, but also I did a survey. and I surveyed and I got, I think, 300 responses. So it's a very, very, very small sample size. And I'm not calling it statistically proof of anything. But again, anecdotally, I surveyed readers and I asked them what the most important thing was when they're reading a book. And they said, no, the first answer, almost overwhelmingly, I didn't pull the survey up, so I can't tell you this, the responses exactly, but almost overwhelmingly was story and then characters, and then editing slash world building came in there. There were other elements that I had added in there. I think sexual content was one. But in the comments, the readers said they could forgive just about anything if it had a great story and great characters that they were going to fall in love with. Some people did note that editing was still important and was the thing that could also pull them out of the story. And when I say editing, I mean like grammar, proofreading, quality issues. So when I talk about the importance of edits and I put proofreaders at the bottom, that's because not because I don't think proofreading is important, but because I'm trying to help you allocate your money, and getting the small detailed things isn't going to be the thing that makes or breaks the book. What's going to make or break the book is the story and the characters. And so that's why I always say developmental editing is where the magic happens. And that's where you want to put your money. If that's the only thing that you can afford, that's the thing that you should spend it on. Not only that, but what you learn in developmental edits are things that you can carry with you throughout the rest of your career. Every edit that you do, you're going to learn something new. Every editor you work with, you're going to learn something different. And those things can help build your ability to craft a story and build an audience and have books that are always recommended and reread and loved. So when you're building your production team in order of importance, not importance, but well, in order of importance, or where I think you should spend your money, is developmental editing, copy editing, proofreading, and then formatting. And the reason formatting is at the end is because I think formatting is more of a objective skill. It's something that you can learn a little more easily than you can learn how to proofread or how to developmental edit. It's something that you can teach yourself to do a bit more easily. Not to say, again, I don't want any formatters to come after me either. Not to say that there isn't such a thing as skilled formatting to make a book really beautiful and to get it done a lot more quickly. Just that, again, when you have to make choices, these are the hard choices that I'm recommending. Okay, so on your mid-range budget, the next thing then to do is to research editors and team members who fall into that budget. Ask for recommendations for friends, and make sure that what you're getting is going to be serve you the best as you move forward. Okay, so that's what you do for a mid-range budget. What if you have no budget? Like really your budget is so small for a production team that it's almost non-existent. In that case, no budget, obviously you can't hire anybody. So you have to find ways to swap with skilled friends. So let's say that you have a friend who's really great at picking up pacing problems and making recommendations on characterization, but she needs somebody to format, and you're great at formatting, but not that great at the picking up pacing problems and developing characterization. Then you can switch. So it's a swap of skills. You're looking for somebody to swap skills with. The other things that you can do are heavily rely on critique groups. In this, when you do critique groups and also beta readers, you're writing a little bit more by committee. So it's not so much as having a team as having a bit of a committee, but this can help you get the feedback that you need that you can't afford to buy. If you're going to use beta readers, make sure you know exactly what types of things you want the beta readers to tell you. If you just say, hey, read this and tell me what you thought, you're going to get a lot of, oh, I loved it, it was great, which isn't super useful and certainly doesn't take the place of edits. So develop a list of questions within reason, because beta readers are usually unpaid. Develop a list of questions that the beta readers can come back with, maybe in particular trouble spots or how they felt about the characters or anything that stood out to them as, oh, I wonder about this, that they otherwise might not have thought to mention. When you're working on a budget, you do also need to remember that, or when you're working with no budget, just need to remember that that could potentially crop up in reviews if people feel that the quality wasn't there, didn't have a good editor, or they feel disappointed because there were a lot of craft issues or errors. And that is the risk that you run when you go with no budget and no skilled production team. So then I said I would mention briefly what you would do if you had like unlimited budget. Make your dream list and go for it. You know, if you have unlimited budget, but also know that if you're paying that, that it has to be worth it. It has to be worth it in return for you. And return doesn't have to be necessarily book sales. It can be readers. It can be, for some people, that's why vanity publishing exists. For some people, it's just having somebody do it for you and making it really easy. So there's nothing wrong with using a large budget. You just have to understand what the pros and cons of that are. So make a list, have a dream team, know exactly what you want out of your production team, and ask them to make your book, help you make your book amazing. All right, that is the question about the production team. Let me this last question is a little bit harder to answer. So I'm going to, it's harder to answer in that I need to show you things. So I'm going to be popping up onto the screen, onto this banner underneath me, different ways of thinking about this. So I have to, my editor, who I respect, says that, sorry, I have to look for this question because it doesn't all list here. Okay. My editor, who I respect, says that asking questions in the narrative throws readers out. It's third person point of view close. And it's things like the door was ajar. She knew she locked it. Enter or run. She wasn't sure which to do. And the questioner goes on to say, I don't want to not give this editing comment the thought it deserves. Okay, so here we go. This is the first example. The door was ajar. She knew she locked it. She wasn't sure which to do. And then the next part is actually the part of the comment. So first, I think it's important when we're talking about this to talk about both deep point of view and close third. And some people think that they are exactly the same thing. I don't agree. I think there is a difference between deep point of view and close third, because writing a true deep point of view is really difficult and could be exhausting if you're trying to write it for long periods of time. So when we're talking about deep point of view, essentially what deep point of view does is it removes the narrative voice, and instead it's putting you, the reader, directly into the mind of the character. So we have the character's experiences directly on page, not being filtered through a narrative. In close third, we still have that narrative quality. So it feels more like we are being told some things, but also experiencing some things. So I'm going to run you through some different examples. And essentially, I think if I put these up right, it leads you through like a deeper point of view. And then I'm going to come back kind of as I'm doing this to answer this question precisely. But I think it helps to see examples. So this is the original example. The door was ajar. She knew she locked it. Enter or run. She wasn't sure which to do. And the first thing that I want to point out here is that the problem here isn't necessarily the question. For one thing, you're using a filtering system here. She knew she locked it. So she knew is a filter, that instead of delivering the experience, it actually kind of filters the character's perception. So I'm going to show you what this can look like in another close point of view. And then I'm going to tell you why the editor might be struggling with the question. So here's a closer point of view. The door was ajar. She'd locked it. Entering seemed like a risky option, but running wasn't her style. She took a step forward. So there's some changes here, and I think it's pretty obvious that there's changes. So the first one is I just cut that filtering perception of she knew. So instead of she knew she locked it, it becomes she locked it, which is an affirmative statement. Then I did take out the question and I said, instead of saying enter or run, I said entering seemed like a risky option, but running wasn't her style. She took a step forward. And I added that at the end just because it needs a little bit of context. So I don't know what's coming in yours, but it just needs a little context. So and when I changed entering seemed like a risky option, but running wasn't her style, instead of asking what seems like maybe asking the audience a question, instead of asking herself a question, I give information about the two options. One is she could enter, but it's risky, or two, running really isn't who she is. So you get a little bit closer to the character in understanding her. So when you ask this question, enter or run, as I mentioned, can seem like you're either talking to the audience, asking the audience a question, or she's talking to herself in a conscious way. So one of the things again that we do actually know, there's been research done on this, is that people have different thought patterns, which seems like an obvious thing to say, but some people have a running commentary in their head and they are constantly like running through scenarios and almost talking to themselves and asking themselves questions. But some people don't have that running commentary. I have running commentary, so I don't know what it looks like in the other way. But I know that some people don't have running commentary. And so when they encounter a situation like the original, the door was ajar, she knew she locked it, enter or run, she wasn't sure which to do. Asking a question seems really self conscious and more like something that you would do if you were talking to somebody else, not if you were talking to the audience. So for some readers, it can feel like a disconnect or pulling them out of the story or just feel like a more shallow point of view. However, when you read things about deep point of view, when you read recommended sources about deep point of view, one of the things that some people who do deep point of view suggest is asking questions instead of like filtering a perception, like ask a question. So this, I think, it fits for close third. In certain situations, I think it can work in a deep point of view. I don't think it feels like in this example, it's in really close or deep point of view. So I do think that this is a shallow point of view or shallower than perhaps the author thought they were writing in. And um, that may be what the editor is trying to get at without realizing that the she knew was also a problem. And so just recognizing that the question may seem self-conscious or like talking to the audience, that's what the editor keyed in on. So I'm going to show you a couple of other kind of options for thinking about what this looks like in a deep point of view and a close third. So this is, I put this one in first point of view first person, because I think this question is a good one, but some people are writing in first. And I also changed it to present tense. So the previous two were third past, and this is first person because I want you to see what a close point of view looks like in first person. The door is ajar. I locked it. Entering seemed risky, but I'm not one for ignoring problems either. A shot of bravado mixed with stupidity propels me through the door. So this tells you what the author is feeling, what she's experiencing, what the reader character is experiencing and thinking and feeling. So without telling you, again, I locked it. So instead of she knew she locked it, I make an affirmative statement. I'm making a strong statement. I locked it rather than kind of a wishy-washy, she knew she locked it. I locked it. I'm saying it. I'm affirming it to myself. I know. And then again, instead of the question, I'm making a statement that mixes um, my feelings with the issue at hand, or my personality or my characterization with the issue at hand. Entering entering seemed risky, but I'm not one for ignoring problems either. So a little bit of information there. And then uh, the decision. I just added the decision there. Then the last one is, again, close third. And this is using the question. The door was ajar. She'd locked it. That affirmative statement makes a big difference in this little paragraph. Enter or run. It wasn't an easy choice. So instead of using the she wasn't sure at the end, I used it wasn't an easy choice, which again pulls out a little bit of that narrative and gets you closer to close third. All right, so that is the last question for today. That was the third question. Just as a reminder, you can ask questions. We'll be back again in 2 weeks. So you can ask questions via the form. The form is available on these different platforms in the video description. So if you want to ask questions, you can use that form. If you have any questions, you can pop them into the comments on either YouTube or Facebook. I'm happy to answer questions on any of these that I talked about today. So you can just ask in the comments. And I hope I will see you all back here again in 2 weeks. Until next time, happy reading.